I was a fan of director Jonathan Demme. He was a unique filmmaker. When you look at his best films, of which I would include The Silence of the Lambs, Philadelphia, Something Wild, and Stop Making Sense, you can see that he had a talent for getting amazing performances out of his actors and utilizing cool and unusual music on his soundtracks, and how he seemed drawn to telling stories about life in America and how strange and thrilling it could be. Yet I'm frequently disappointed whenever critics and general moviegoers speak in dismissive terms about Demme's 1998 adaptation of Beloved, which I have forever maintained is another one of his best films. But when Beloved was released in theaters at the tail end of the 20th century, it got mixed reviews, and it flopped at the box office. And today, in the 21st century, it has faded entirely from the public's consciousness. As of this video essay's uploading, Beloved still has no Blu-ray release, and we're still stuck with that old DVD which has hardly any special features, outside of the theatrical trailer and a brief making-of featurette which was intended to promote the film at the time, but that was before its dispiriting box office returns. The film just isn't all that much talked about these days, and whenever it is, people tend to remember it as a failure. For instance, in the Encyclopedia of Great Filmmakers, when writing about Jonathan Demme's filmography, critic Peter N. Chumo II claims that Beloved is, quote, arguably a major misstep in his career. A shapeless, confusing mess about the aftermath of slavery, Beloved trades the clarity of Demme's best work for an attempt at something grand and epic, but the film is never emotionally moving and often downright puzzling. It is also tedious, one adjective that could never before have applied to Demme's work. A portentous stream of consciousness period piece about slavery's horrible legacy does not fit the unique sensibility of one of America's greatest living filmmakers, unquote. Now, when I was growing up as a teenager and discovering Demme's work for the first time, I put off seeing Beloved for many years because of criticisms like the one I just mentioned, which made me assume that it was one of his lesser works. However, by the time I was in college, I became more curious about actually watching Beloved. Knowing that the film had a reputation for supposedly being confusing and puzzling, I decided that the best course of action would be to read Toni Morrison's book first. I regret that the audiobook which I checked out from my school's library was one of those abridged audiobooks which skipped over a bunch of passages in the novel. And yet, by the end of it, I had absorbed the basics of the story, and I enjoyed what I had gleaned from it. Toni Morrison had written what I thought was a very emotionally moving story, and I didn't find it confusing so much as intriguingly ambiguous. I liked the book, and I thought, if the film's anything like this, it must be pretty good. As it turns out, I loved the film, and rather than being puzzled by it, I was more puzzled that so many critics and audiences just didn't get it. Was this one of those instances where you had to have read the book in order to appreciate the film? I'm not sure, but there's no doubt that Beloved is a complex film. Therefore, no one viewer is going to have the same reaction to it that another will. So, to determine why Beloved got such a mixed response, first I'll have to take you back to the beginning, to the earliest stages of its development, when it took its eventual shape, so that you can get a better understanding of why the film we eventually got may have appealed to individuals like me, but perhaps not in a way which was as easily accessible for mass audiences in the late 1990s. And then, later, I'll make a case for why I consider Beloved to be a great film. Producer and star Oprah Winfrey first began her mission to adapt Beloved into a feature film in 1987. According to journalist Gary Dretzka, author Toni Morrison had sent a manuscript of her novel of Beloved to the sister of actress Akosha Busia, who had been Oprah Winfrey's co-star in The Color Purple. As soon as Beloved was published, Busia picked up a copy of the novel, read it in one sitting, called up Winfrey, and advised her to read it as well. Morrison's book was inspired by the true story of Margaret Garner, who, instead of letting her slave owner seize her children from her, succeeded in killing one of her children and even attempted to kill all of them, but then was taken back for stealing property, was sold downriver to New Orleans, and jumped overboard with another child. That child drowned, and Garner was pulled back out of the water and sent south. Garner wasn't tried for murder, but for stealing property, because her children, being slaves, were not considered human beings.
I read an article in a 19th century newspaper about a woman whose name was Margaret Garner. It was an article that stayed with me for a long, long time and seemed to have in it an extraordinary idea that was worthy of a novel, which was this compulsion to nurture, this ferocity that a woman has to be responsible for her children, and at the same time, the kind of tensions that exist in trying to be a separate, complete individual.
In the book, Toni Morrison changed Margaret Garner to a fictionalized protagonist named Sethe, who kills her daughter, nicknamed Crawling Already, and tries but fails to kill her other three children, Denver, Howard, and Bugler.
In my mind, Paul D., just the way he was described, that was Danny Glover. And I felt from the very first time reading it, you know, when you create images in your imagination when you're reading a book, I felt that I was Sethe.
You saw it that night, that Saturday night reading the book.
I saw it.
You Sethe is Oprah.
Yeah.
Or Oprah is Sethe.
Oh, Oprah is Sethe.
I tried to get Toni Morrison's number. She had a private number. I was desperate to speak to her. So I called the fire department in her town. This is Oprah Winfrey calling, and it's an emergency, and I need to reach Miss Morrison. Can you please call her and tell her? And they're like, what? Is this real? Is this a... Anyway, I got the number.
She said, Toni Morrison, this is Oprah Winfrey. And I said, how did you get my number? And she said, I called the police and the fire department. My second question, which I didn't put, was how did they get it?
Miss Morrison, I just finished reading Beloved. And I had to talk to you. And I said, do people say to you that they have to start and stop and start and stop when they're reading? Because I had to keep going over things because just trying to take it all in. And she said, that, my dear, is called reading. And I said to her I really wanted to do a movie, and she said she didn't think that that would be possible, but that she would think about it.
I turned and talked to my kids and said, that was Oprah Winfrey. She wants to do Beloved. And I said, gee, I don't know if it should be a film. And my oldest son said, Ma, you'll always have the book. It's not destroying the book. It's just another version.
And what's ironic about it is that I had no idea how you make a movie. You know, I had been in The Color Purple and just was, you know, felt glorified to be able to be there. And had no idea how you make a movie. But I felt that it should be a movie. I immediately felt, you know, I wasn't 20 pages in and felt like, because that's how it appeared in my mind as a movie, scene after scene after scene after scene. Wasn't sure how you do it. So I mentioned the fact that I wanted to do a movie. And Toni sounded like she threw back her head in one of those.
Another one.
Yes. Oh, you foolish girl.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
What do you know?
Yeah.
This is
No,
not
oh,
television.
ridiculous. How do you... She said, well, how do you plan to do that? And oh, as only Toni Morrison can. And I was like, well. So I thought that meant she wanted to be involved.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, but you could help me. Oh, don't. I'm not like trying to, you know, cut you out of the deal. She goes, oh, no, I don't want to help. That isn't what I do. She said, that isn't what I do. And besides, I do not want these people in my house again, she said. Which is the first time
That's interesting.
Yes, I realized that writers and a lot of them, and Toni, of course, included, is it's like visitation. It's like being inhabited yourself and having all those characters up in your house. She said, I don't want these people in my house again.
Winfrey optioned the book from Morrison and set about trying to figure out how to make it into a movie. The book would win the Pulitzer Prize in 1988. In 1991, Winfrey hired Akosha Busa to write a script, and Busa delivered a draft of it, but ultimately her draft was discarded. Busa's name still appears in the film's end credits because she arbitrated for it. Getting Hollywood interested in the project was no easy task. One director after another turned it down. In an interview with Anna Hornaday, Winfrey commented, I had Jane Campion say to me she didn't know enough about the black experience. It would take too long for her to figure it out. Jodie Foster, who had done Toni Morrison as part of her thesis, didn't feel it could be a movie, just felt it was literary material. In an interview with Jonathan Van Meter, Winfrey mentioned that she'd also considered Peter Weir to direct. Those of you who follow my channel know that Peter Weir is another one of my favorite directors. I'm sure his version of Beloved would have been very interesting. The problem, however, was that Winfrey saw herself as playing the tormented main character of Sethe, yet Peter Weir couldn't quite see her playing the part. Weir wasn't entirely against casting Winfrey, but he wanted to at least be given the choice of casting another actress if he thought it was necessary, an idea which didn't sit well with Winfrey. She mimicked Weir's Australian accent and recalled thinking to herself, you want me to give you my script and you decide if I can be in it? Okay, bye-bye. I did not feel like relinquishing control.
There had been other directors in this 10-year period. Everybody says, trust me. I think it's a Hollywood thing.
Yeah, right.
You leave the meeting and they say,
trust me, be okay.
Trust me,
Yeah.
trust me, be okay.
I'll take care of you.
Don't worry about it. Listen.
That's right.
It'll be fine. And every single time that happened, I would leave the meeting and I would say to Kate, my producer, I'd say, what do you think? What do you think? I don't know. What do you think? I don't know. Was she okay? I don't know. What do you...
Finding a director was proving so difficult that Winfrey began to wonder if Beloved was simply unfilmable and not ideal material for a movie. However, Kate Forte, who ran Winfrey's film company, told her, no, the problem is you're looking for a woman and you're looking for a black person and you're looking for foreign people. We should just go with the person who shares your vision. That vision eventually started coming to life in 1996 when Winfrey commissioned Richard LaGravenese, Academy Award nominee for The Fisher King, to write a new draft of the script.
Beloved, the film. Yeah. Now you wrote the screenplay. I am one of the writers, yes.
LaGravenese's adaptation work on Clint Eastwood's Bridges of Madison County had resulted in a big box office success, demonstrating that he knew how to locate cinematic through lines in challenging source material.
Oh, I love her. She's the one who hired me, and I actually was just working for her.
Did she interview you?
Uh-uh.
She just what? She hired you? Did I hear you're a pretty good screenwriter? You get away with words?
She saw Bridges, actually, and she liked Bridges. And then
Madison
from
County?
there, yeah.
You wrote that too?
Yeah.
The book was like a poem to him, and what he does remember saying often is that it was the first adaptation he did in which he didn't invent anything. All he attempted to do was take this beautiful writing of Toni Morrison's and translate it into screenplay language, and that it was an honor to do so. When you read LaGravenese's draft of the script, you notice that it contains some spectacular stuff from the novel which actually didn't make it into the finished film. For example, Paul D's thrilling escape from Sweet Home during a mudslide. I think that would have been awesome to see in the movie. Kate Forte sent LaGravenese's draft of the script to producer Edward Saxon, who had won the Best Picture Academy Award for The Silence of the Lambs.
We've got some personal thank yous. I personally want to thank my parents, my family, my teachers, especially Art Murphy, and Jonathan Demme, my mentor and dear friend.
Saxon was Jonathan Demme's longtime producing partner and tended to look for projects for him. Demme was fascinated by race issues. He and Saxon had even visited Haiti, which had had a history of French slavery, and Demme himself actually spoke the Creole language. Demme and Saxon had made several documentaries which had explored race issues. Yet Demme's directorial style had always been difficult to pin down by the studio system.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Demme.
Born in 1944, Jonathan Demme officially entered the world of filmmaking in the early 1970s, helping out as a sometime screenwriter, sometime producer for Roger Corman, before making his directorial debut with 3 Corman flicks in a row: Caged Heat, Crazy Mama, and Fighting Mad. Moviegoers started paying closer attention to Demme's authorship over his films after 1977's Citizens Band, alternatively titled Handle with Care, a film that was unusually funny in its depiction of polygamy, strained father-son relationships, and the idiotic control of radio airwaves. Demme clashed with producer Freddie Fields over this movie so much that at one point Fields fired him, but as Demme later claimed to interviewer Rob Feld, "I didn't know about it, but Roman Polanski called Freddie and said, 'I hear you fired the young director that's making a movie for you. You better get him back, because directors won't want to work with you if you get that reputation.'" Demme's former agent, Jeff Berg, who knew all 3 men very well, questions Demme's account of these events, but Demme claimed that Polanski's appeal helped Demme get control of the movie back, even though it eventually flopped. For the remainder of the 1970s and throughout the 1980s, Demme's career would move in uneven fits and starts, with the failure of the Roy Scheider thriller Last Embrace, a pleasant comeback with the Oscar-winning Melvin and Howard.
Jonathan Demme, thank you for your vision and your talent, and for the plain, old-fashioned fun it was to work with you.
And a disastrous, career-threatening failure with Swing Shift. In my opinion, Stop Making Sense was the first must-see classic of Demme's career, a joyous Talking Heads rockumentary that appealed even to people who weren't big Talking Heads fans. He followed it up with what I consider to be his first really great narrative feature film, Something Wild, which freed Demme from the episodic narrative threads he'd been known for, allowing him now to demonstrate that he could tell engaging stories with compelling characters: the meek hero, the mysterious femme fatale, the menacing villain.
Come on, Charlie, you gotta admit, she looks like she could fuck you right in half. I mean, just fuck you to pieces.
Ray, there's no call for that kind of talk.
You're right. You're right. I understand. Sorry, Charlie.
Oh.
Sorry, Charlie. Come on. Friends?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Something Wild was not a big hit when it came out. That didn't deter Demme very much, though. As the 80s drew to a close, he stayed comfortably within his genre roots, directing the quirky gangster comedy Married to the Mob. Then, at the dawn of the 1990s, everything changed for Jonathan Demme. Thanks to the correct intuition of Orion Pictures co-founder Mike Medavoy, Demme was hired to direct the adaptation of Thomas Harris's bestseller, The Silence of the Lambs. It would be Demme's masterpiece, his long-overdue box office smash, and it would bring him the Academy Award for Best Director.
What became of your lamb, Clarice?
I killed him.
You still wake up sometimes, don't you? You wake up in the dark and hear the screaming of the lambs.
Yes.
And you think if you save poor Catherine, you could make them stop, don't you? You think if Catherine lives, you won't wake up in the dark ever again to that awful screaming of the lambs.
I don't know. I don't know.
Thank you, Clarice.
To Jonathan Demme for Silence of the Lambs.
In the context of my movie-loving life, this is very unanticipated.
Demme followed up Silence of the Lambs with Philadelphia in 1993, also a big commercial hit. Now in his late 40s, Demme had finally emerged as one of Hollywood's most celebrated directors.
Fact of the matter is, when they fired Andrew Beckett because he had AIDS, they
broke the law.
I should not be here, but I am because of the union of such filmmakers as Ed Saxon, Jonathan Demme, who seems to have these attached to his limbs for every actor that works with him of late.
However, Silence of the Lambs in Philadelphia had burdened Demme with the unusual problem of success, and that is, how do you follow up two of the most popular Hollywood movies of the early 90s? So, after Philadelphia, Demme afforded himself a 5-year break from directing. And that was fine, since the money had gotten better anyway. But when Demme read LaGravenese's beloved script, he was knocked out by it. Toni Morrison was also impressed with LaGravenese's script, and the year that LaGravenese submitted his draft, Morrison sent him a Christmas present, a leather-bound copy of Beloved with her own inscription.
When you saw the script, what was it that so emotionally grabbed you to say, this is for me?
You know, what I remember so clearly is I picked up the script, I started reading it, and at about page 30, 32, something like that, was the scene that takes place in the clearing when Baby Suggs calls the men and the women and the children come out of the woods. And I found myself with tears running down my face at this imagery, at the thoughts and feelings that the descriptions evoked. And I thought, I don't know where the script is headed because I hadn't read the book, but I love it. I was already, I've never been so completely hooked and seduced so early in a script in my life.
January 6th. I call my office, I get a message from Jonathan Demme. And I had just vaguely, we had been going down a list of people yet to send it to in this whole 10-year process. So I called Kate Forte in my office in Hollywood. I said, Jonathan Demme has called me. What do you think this means? And she said, well, I sent him the script. What did he say? I know he hasn't said anything. He hasn't said anything to me yet. So you know what the first call was? First question was?
What?
Did I plan to play Setha Young? And I said, well, I never knew, I don't think of her as young or not young. She's just Setha. How young is she when she's young? And he said, I think she's about 16. And I said, not enough gauze, Vaseline in Hollywood for me to play 16, unless you're going to put the camera in Cleveland. So I guess I had to give up.
And we'll be filming in Maryland.
In Maryland. If you don't put the camera in Cleveland, I could play 16. Otherwise, no. And that's
You said no.
That was his condition of like, because I think he was worried that I was, you know, first of all, attached to the film, but also the idea that I was going to try to take control of it and, you know, probably boss him around. So that was hard for me to give up at first because I had always imagined myself running through the wilderness, myself as Setha, running through the woods.
Jonathan Demme called Oprah Winfrey in January 1997, and he and Edward Saxon met Winfrey for dinner in Chicago. Saxon comments that on a scale from 1 to 10, Winfrey was a 12.
The difference is, when somebody says, trust me, and it's right, you don't have to ask anybody. That Jonathan was at my house when we had that meeting, and he got up to go to the bathroom down the hall, and Kate and I were sitting at the kitchen table, and when he left, we went,
This is it, this is it.
Yes, we danced, we call it our Jonathan jig. He comes back in, and we're like this, sitting at the table. The interesting thing, too, is that he didn't say yes immediately, but it looked like it might be a yes. And the next day I called Kate and she said, dare we hope that life could be this good? Dare we hope? I said, I'm hoping. It sounds like it's going to be a yes. And once he said yes, things started moving immediately.
Trust. Now, you said to her, trust me. Meaning what? That
Charlie, I think what I hope I actually said was, you realize, Oprah, that you will need to trust me.
Oh,
Winfrey described her experience of Jonathan Demme by stating, I think it was part of divine order, seeing how we have come to be such good friends. I just adore him as a human being. He has a black heart. He truly understands the black experience. And what's wonderful about Jonathan, and the reason this is a divine marriage, not just a good one, is that he still calls me 2 or 3 times a day for every decision. We are really, truly partners. To be sure, Demme partially shared Peter Weir's reservations about whether or not the public would accept Winfrey in the part of Sethe, commenting, My fear was that the suspension of disbelief was unachievable because we know her too well as who she is, this contemporary, important American person, Oprah. Her likeness is so emblazoned in our minds. How can we forget who she is? I can't even find a parallel. Still, with their meeting having gone so well, Winfrey hired Demme to direct the film, and Demme was ecstatic to actually get paid to make a film this daring. Winfrey partnered up with Disney to make the film, and Ed Saxon recalls that the feeling at Disney was that the studio was making the film as a kind of reparation for Song of the South. Michael Eisner's main concern was to keep Winfrey happy. However, before the movie was ready to enter production, Demme wanted to shape the script so that it more closely resembled his vision for the film. Jonathan Demme admitted that there were several different directions he could have gone in adapting Beloved to the screen, but for the sake of keeping it at a 3-hour length, he chose to focus on the central storyline of Sethe and her family terrorized by the ghost of Beloved during the Reconstruction era, and to eliminate most of the flashbacks depicting Sethe's nightmarish experiences at the plantation of Sweet Home.
You had to go off to direct, so you...
That's right. So I couldn't incorporate Jonathan. When Jonathan came on board, I could not incorporate his notes and his interpretation.
Because you're out doing your film.
Right.
Money up front that you needed to spend.
Right.
Since Richard LaGravenese had already left production to go off and make his directorial debut with the film Living Out Loud, Demme turned to a friend of his, screenwriter Adam Brooks, for rewrites.
Richard had to go off and make his own movie.
Right.
You had some additional work done on the script, correct?
A lot. Adam Brooks came in and we worked together on dozens of drafts.
Brooks had known Demme since he was 22 years old. Brooks had studied at NYU and had worked on a movie called Times Square as an assistant to director Alan Moyle. Script supervisor Sandy McLeod was dating Jonathan Demme, and that's how Brooks got to know him. They'd been friends in New York City, which is where Brooks had made the film Ghost Sisters, shot on Super 8 film. Demme had shot some stuff for Brooks when the original cameraman left. Both men eventually wound up living in the town of Nyack, north of Manhattan. Demme had produced a show for HBO called Subway Stories, a collection of short films all related to the New York City subway, and Brooks had written Demme's segment and had introduced Demme to filmmaker Bill Irwin, and they developed an American remake of the Dardenne brothers' film The Promise, but it was never made. Years later, by which point Brooks had written the romantic comedy French Kiss for Lawrence Kasdan, Jonathan Demme contacted Brooks about rewrites for Beloved. Brooks had actually read Toni Morrison's book before, and he comments that because Demme was attached to the film, they hit it off immediately, especially since they lived close to each other in Nyack, making communication easy. This began a 3-month rewriting process. Demme wanted the script to be more like the book itself, and he and Brooks would sit together in Demme's office, both with drafts of the script, discussing changes, then Brooks would go off and write. Demme was specific about many visual and specific narrative choices. Capitalization, for instance, was an interesting stylistic idea he had of using, mostly for flashback sequences. Sometimes Brooks would try his own ideas, and Demme would either go for them or not. Sometimes Oprah Winfrey would call them with notes. Brooks observes that Winfrey always puts a family energy into everything she does. When the script was finished, they spent a great weekend at Winfrey's home in Chicago doing a table read. That's where Brooks first met Toni Morrison, by which point they'd knocked out 3 drafts of the script. Morrison even told Brooks that he'd done a great job with it. After Jonathan Demme came on board the project, the first table read, using Richard LaGravenese's draft of the script, included Samuel L. Jackson as Paul D. and the singer Lauryn Hill in the part of Denver. Demme's cuts to the script and the rewrites with Adam Brooks started directly afterwards. Samuel L. Jackson was just there to assist with the table read. The filmmakers had always intended to cast Danny Glover as Paul D. They wanted to keep Lauryn Hill, but she had to drop out due to pregnancy. Still, the filmmakers were able to secure an impressive cast. Kimberly Elise as Denver, Thandie Newton as Beloved, Albert Hall as Stampede, Lisa Gay Hamilton as a young Sethe, plus some roles for Irma P. Hall, Wes Bentley, even Jason Robards.
And ultimately, I did 3 auditions, and I think then the 4th was a screen test. And a beautiful memory was when I left the screen test and I was walking to my car, I heard Jonathan behind me, and he said, "Bye, Denver." And I turned around and I was like, I have the part. He's like, "Yes." And he started crying. He was so happy for me. And together we were crying and hugging. It makes me want to cry now in the parking lot, just celebrating.
The production was graced with a multiplied dignity and maturity when Beah Richards was cast as Baby Suggs. Not only that, but she even got a big credit in the theatrical trailer, something which Jonathan Demme insisted upon.
The question that is raised by this play is the question of identity. Who are we all? Who are any of us? We are the same, you know that.
Academy Award-winning director Jonathan Demme saw parallels to his film Silence of the Lambs in Philadelphia.
I'm very, very moved by a good person who is faced with a difficult struggle and who perseveres and tries to get to the other side of it.
Jonathan Demme was destined to direct this as I was destined to be a part of it as Toni Morrison. He was destined to write it. It all fell into place after a decade to come to the right time and space to create our beloved.
Oprah Winfrey, however, immediately encountered difficulties in her task of getting into character as Sethe. One issue was that Toni Morrison's opinion of Sethe was far more judgmental than Winfrey's. In an interview with Roger Ebert, Winfrey revealed, "Toni spoke to me of that iron-willed, arrogant Sethe, and I had trouble with the term arrogant. And Toni said, when I tell you she's arrogant, believe it. She's arrogant. Arrogant in her unwavering confidence, without one moment of doubt, that the decision that she made to take the life of her children was the right decision." Winfrey then stated, "In the process of making this movie, I went there. I said to Toni that I knew the stories, but I never felt the stories. I got for the first time what every slave knew, that the beatings, the mistreatment by master, going to the fields, working hard, doesn't in any way come close to the spiritual and emotional explanation of what slavery is. It's the loss of self, the loss of your own humanity. It's not being able to have a will to choose." One of the hardest scenes for Winfrey to perform was Sethe's speech where she talks of her 28 days of freedom. Winfrey commented, "I did 4 takes and I couldn't get through it. I was hysterical. The hardest line for me was when she says,
Looked like I loved them more after we got here. Maybe I just knew that long as we was in Kentucky with school teacher, they really wasn't mine to love."
Winfrey explained, "I had read the book, but in acting the scene, I was going to the knowing place. What does that mean? It means that every time a slave woman or man went to the fields, they came back home knowing that their children might not be there. If master decides he wants to sell them, they're gone. They're not yours. They don't belong to you." And another hard line of dialogue to get through was what she said about freedom. "Wake up in the morning and decide for myself what to do with the day."
I'd wake up in the morning and decide for myself what to do with the day.
Winfrey explained, "That line was life-transforming for me. It was the purest definition of freedom. But to say that line was hard. Until I was in the moment with Danny, I never thought that it would be that hard." Finally, Jonathan Demme said to me, "We're going to turn the camera around on Danny and let you come back and try again tomorrow." I felt like a failure. I'm blowing it. But I really needed to come back because I was so emotional about it. I had lost touch with Sethe because she just tells it. She just tells it. She's not all in it. She just tells it. In the film's opening sequence, when Beloved's unseen ghost hurls Sethe's dog, named Here Boy, against the wall, Winfrey commented that she first played the scene in an emotional way, rushing to the injured dog. Then Jonathan Demme had a conversation with Winfrey saying, "I don't know how you're feeling about the dog hitting the wall, but I don't think she's going to be surprised to see it. Do you?" And I realized she wouldn't be. And he goes on, because she's been in that house living with this ghost, and the ghost has done all kinds of unspeakable things. So I don't think she's going to be shocked at all. I think she's going to be resigned and sad that baby ghost just won't leave this house alone. Ed Saxon comments that aside from table reads, Demme never rehearsed, except on the set. He didn't want to risk actors doing their best work in rehearsal. He was what you might call an actor whisperer. The film did go a little over budget, but Saxon denies claims that the budget was as high as $80 million. Whatever the budget was, however, the bottom line was that Beloved was an expensive film to make.
Me and my woman's planning on starting a new life. Nobody's gonna own us no more. Nobody's gonna own my children either.
Artistically, it was turning out to be a major achievement for everyone involved. Commercially, it was doomed.
No matter what happened, God has led you home.
How do you market a film like Beloved? Ed Saxon knew that it could be sold as a ghost story, especially since it was made by the same filmmaking team behind The Silence of the Lambs. But that was a traditionally scary film, whereas Beloved, while immensely disturbing in parts, is not the kind of horror movie that you'd take a date to see. You don't freak out hysterically and cover your eyes while watching it, you merely sit there and cringe at its brutality. So, Oprah Winfrey attempted to promote it more as a romantic film, with her primarily female viewership being its target audience.
This is a love story. It's a story about learning to trust and love again, romantic love. It is a love story about how all women feel about their children and the great depths and extent they would go to protect their children.
On her talk show, she boasted about her kissing scenes and lovemaking scenes with Danny Glover, and Glover himself told the audience that he considered Beloved to be the most important film he'd ever made. I do think that Winfrey and Glover have a moving chemistry in the film, but Beloved is not exactly what I'd call a marvelously romantic story. Sethe and Paul D's relationship only occupies less than a fourth of the 3-hour film, and their relationship is a rocky one, due in large part to Sethe's unattractive mood swings. Occasionally, Sethe is loving to Paul D, and even stands up for him whenever Denver speaks disrespectfully to him, but a lot of the time, Sethe herself is cruel to him, takes him for granted, and, in general, just treats him badly. Further poisoning the romantic angle is how Beloved so grotesquely interferes in Sethe's relationship with Paul D via a ghoulish rape scene. The infantile young woman takes control of the innocent man's mind and forces herself on him, effectively making him feel immoral and unclean.
Hit it hard. Hit it hard. Hit it hard. Hit it hard. Hit it hard.
When Paul D finally finds out the truth about Sethe's bloody past and tries to tell her that what she did to her children was wrong, Sethe refuses to take the criticism and instead casually lets Paul D slip out of her life.
They ain't at Sweet Home. School teacher ain't got 'em.
Maybe there's worse.
It ain't my job to know what's worse, Paul D. It's my job to know what is and to keep my children away from it. 'Cause I'd rather know they had peace in heaven than live in a hell here on earth. So help me, Jesus.
What you did was wrong, Sethe.
I should have gone back there. Took my babies. Back to Sweet Home.
Yeah, there could have been a way. Some other way.
What way, Paul D?
You got 2 feet, Sethe, not 4. You can set aside something for me. Might be late. Getting back.
After all I just told you, Paul D. And after you telling me how many feet I got. You think saying goodbye is gonna break me into pieces? You're a sweet man. So long, Paul D.
When Paul D eventually returns to Sethe at the end, planning to take care of her, Sethe has already gone insane by that point, and she's rather uncomprehending of the loving man standing before her. So again, just as this is not a horror movie that you and your date would be excitedly screaming through, it is also not the kind of lovey-dovey romantic film which you and your date might be making out during. Instead, this is a film that commands your attention, and it challenges you to try and care about this cold, bitter, complicated woman and her long-suffering lover who doesn't always have her undivided attention. Oprah Winfrey's network kindly granted me access to the October 1998 episode of her talk show in which she promoted the film on the day of its opening. Not only were Danny Glover, Thandie Newton, and Kimberly Elise among the guests, but so was Jonathan Demme, who stated his love for the film, while Winfrey proclaimed him to be the father of the production. Then, via satellite communication, the film's mother figure, Toni Morrison, made a surprise appearance on the big screen behind everyone on stage, to thunderous applause from the audience. On camera, Winfrey asked Morrison what she thought of the film, and Morrison answered, "Oh, it's fantastic. It's the most extraordinary movie I have seen in a long time, and the fact that it's some configuration of a narrative that had been with me for so many years and so difficult to write makes it the most stunning experience for me. I hope you're proud of yourselves." Morrison didn't stop there, though. She explained that her first viewing of the film was complicated. She recalled that when she visited the set, she was thrilled by the filmmaking craft, particularly the actors' clothes, yet commented, "But actually looking at the movie was a different experience. It took 3 times. I've seen that movie 3 times now, and I've only now begun to approach looking at it the way a moviegoer looks at it, because the first time I was anticipating things that I expected to be there. Is this scary? Is this frightening? Is this soothing? Is this the way I saw it?" And there were huge differences, as there should have been. I think Morrison's reaction to the film set the tone for how the public eventually responded. Embarrassingly, when Beloved opened in theaters, it was beaten for the #1 spot by Bride of Chucky, a far more conventionally crowd-pleasing horror movie. Coincidentally, Bride of Chucky, like Beloved, also was about a dead girl who's resurrected in the body of another figure in order to exact her revenge.
I wouldn't marry you if you had the body of G.I. Joe.
Hey, Raggedy Ann, you looked in the mirror lately? Now's not the time to get picky.
Ed Saxon personally witnessed families, even black families, standing in line at the movie theater, arguing over what movie to see, with some saying, "I want to see Beloved," while others protested, "I want to see Chucky." And in another one of those weird coincidences that you just can't explain, in the summer of 2019, when the documentary Toni Morrison, The Pieces I Am premiered in theaters, guess what else was playing at the same time? That's right, the Child's Play remake. What the hell is up with this whole pattern of Chucky the Killer Doll showing up wherever Toni Morrison themed films are playing? It's weird and funny, and I don't understand it. You know, it's not funny though, the absolute lack of attention which Beloved got following its theatrical release. Adam Brooks remembers that initially there'd been all this excitement, a belief that everybody would get awards.
Tell me how proud you are of her, because I know you can be proud of a lot of her other accomplishments. This is a little different.
Well, she's waited 10 years for this project, and the acting is superb. You wouldn't know it's the Oprah Winfrey talk show host.
The movie is, for those who read the book, I think they'll feel that we have been faithful to the book. And by the way, the author, Toni Morrison, feels faithful to the book. We screened the movie in New York together a couple of nights ago, and I saw her dancing to the band afterwards with joy. So I think that we did all right.
Always a good sign.
That's right. The toughest critic is always the author, and I think we have her approval.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We're going to skip one, and we're going to...
There'd been a big opening in New York with a live singing performance by Angelique Kidjo, but not much of note afterwards. The film received only one Academy Award nomination, Best Costume Design, Colleen Atwood, but it did not win. Adam Brooks comments that he was happy with the film, but he believes that in its first third, the pacing could have been more compelling. The basic problem was that it was a challenging, innovative art film that was packaged and sold as a mainstream, easily accessible story that opened in thousands of theaters on the same weekend. Maybe it was never destined to be successful or properly appreciated, but perhaps a campaign that built more gradually and was geared to helping audiences find their way in would have helped a little better. It's a little like when Toni Morrison told Oprah Winfrey that putting effort into studying a text is what's called reading. Like the book, the film is wonderfully challenging. Richard LaGravenese has stated in interviews that he believes the film lost some of the book's poetry and that it was at times too literal. He regretted that some of the stuff from his draft of the script was deleted by Jonathan Demme in future drafts.
What do you think of the film? I think it's an amazing piece of work. The kind of film that really needs to be put out there as much as possible. We've gotten to the point where everything's about entertainment, and Beloved is more of an experience. I can't really call it an entertainment. Yeah. And I know that's maybe why people are resisting in some way, but I think it's important to put that stuff out there because then we just go soft in the head.
Ed Saxon says that if he could do it all over again, he would have made the film shorter. The 3-hour running time was a lot to ask of casual moviegoers, especially with a storyline this daunting and ambiguous. Oprah Winfrey has since stated that she thinks it was a very expensive mistake for her to insist that the film remain faithful to the book.
What was the worst turkey you've had?
The worst, I don't want to call it a turkey, but it didn't work, and it sent me into a massive, depressive, macaroni and cheesy and tailspin, literally, when I did the movie Beloved, which I have and still have such passion for. 1998, I didn't, I'm not in the movie business. I did this movie because I was passionate about it. And I didn't know that you had that weekend, and that is it. So I am thinking that if people don't go to this week, they'll go next week. And so that morning, it premiered on a Friday night, and I remember Saturday morning hearing that we got beat by something called Chucky. I didn't even know what Chucky was. And everybody's like, well, now this in the box office wasn't what it's supposed to be. And they're already predicting what the weekend is going to be. And it's just Saturday morning. And I asked my chef at the time, Art Smith, make some macaroni and cheese. And I really, literally went into a tailspin about it.
How much macaroni did you eat?
Oh, I ate about 30 pounds worth. I'm not kidding. And I would have to say, it's the only time in my life, and I use all life experiences to teach me, the only time in my life I was ever depressed. And I recognized I am depressed because I've done enough shows. Oh, this is what those people must feel like who've been depressed.
Many of our viewers absolutely love your film of Toni Morrison's Beloved. However, at the time of its release, it fell into the stigma that serious black films don't do so well at the box office. What can be done to change this?
Oh gosh, so many African American films do so well anymore that I don't perceive that as a issue or a problem anymore. You think about gee, Tyler Perry, everybody. I think the exciting, vibrant American cinema being made by African American filmmakers and starring African American actors. I want to tell you something though about Beloved. Beloved only played in theaters for 4 weeks. It made $22 million. I think that's a lot of money. And the only reason it left theaters after a month was because the Disney Corporation that released the picture wanted all the beloved theaters where we were doing very well in a number of situations, but Walt Disney Company wanted those theaters for Adam Sandler's Waterboy. So we were told that they were going to bring us back at the end of the year, and they didn't, but the picture did very respectfully. It was in the top 10 its whole life.
The thing is, though, the film's intake of $22 million would have been more impressive to the industry if the film had not cost so much to make. It may have pleased individuals here and there, but in the end, movie making is a business, and you have to make a profit, and Beloved didn't. Kitty Kelly's unauthorized biography of Oprah Winfrey includes a quote by Jonathan Demme in which he stated, "I'd love to make another movie with Oprah. I'd like to find her a comedy, and we wouldn't hype it as much as Beloved." Unfortunately, Demme and Winfrey would never work together again. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert gave Beloved 2 thumbs up.
Toni Morrison says it took her 3 viewings to fully appreciate Beloved, and I know what she meant. This is a film constructed out of the fragments of memory and experience, and if you haven't read the book, you'll have trouble at first understanding the story. The movie was directed by Jonathan Demme, who uses wonderful performances and an overarching supernatural mood to create his effects. The ads, of course, try to package the story as uplifting, almost cheerful, but it's very dark. The painful aftermath of the greatest sin in our nation's history. It's a strong, original film.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And you mentioned that it took Toni Morrison 3 viewings to appreciate the picture. Well, it took me 2. But especially after the second viewing, I was mightily impressed with this film in a variety of ways. That also shows Winfrey's ability to be a ferociously powerful actress. Hers, I think, is a complete performance as she displays a range in this picture from maternal tenderness to wounded victim to hopeful lover. Thumbs up for her and for director Jonathan Demme's distinctive Beloved.
When you see it, when the movie is over, you understand everything, but during the experience, sometimes you're at sea.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. But you know, now we talk about epic pictures. When we use that phrase, it usually means a physical landscape, you know, Lawrence of Arabia, the classic epic. But this is a human epic, and I don't mean to be being glib with that, but really, this whole time, place, world experience we're given.
You can easily see how this could have been turned into material that would be much less challenging and much less textured, and it wouldn't have been as good a film.
We may not have given Demme enough credit. This is one of the great directors, and it is a beautiful-looking film.
And also the writer, Richard LaGravenese, who took the novel and some earlier drafts of the screenplay and shaped it into this final form for Demme.
But Ebert later speculated that the film might have flopped because parts of it were confusing to him and because the film lacked an ideally happy ending. When Ebert writes that the film was confusing, I wonder if he was referring to the way that the characters of Sethe's 2 sons, Howard and Bugler, were inserted into the film. Howard and Bugler appear only in flashbacks, and all too briefly, and because of the transitions where they're sometimes seen fading away, I'd understand it if moviegoers got the wrong message from this. Are Howard and Bugler dead? Are they alive? And if so, where are they? Anyone who's read the book carefully knows that Howard and Bugler are still alive somewhere, but maybe people who went into the movie cold didn't get it. I even found an old frequently asked question post on IMDb which confusingly asks, why did Sethe kill her children? And then even more confusingly answers, she killed them because... Guys, Sethe didn't kill all of her children. The only child she actually managed to kill was Crawling Already, aka Beloved. Howard, Bugler, and Denver all survived her assaults. Is that really so hard to understand? Well, yeah, maybe for mass audiences. Again, it's this whole problem of taking a sprawling piece of literature and then trying to massage it to fit inside a small cinematic box. That's no easy task, and with a story this complex, it's inevitable that things aren't going to make complete sense to everyone on the first viewing. On the note of the film's lack of a happy ending, one can concede that the ending of the film, like the ending of the book, leaves a lot of things unexplained. Did Beloved leave because she forgave Sethe, or because the other women exorcised her? Ed Saxon comments that he and Jonathan Demme weren't sure on this point. Saxon also points out that Sethe doesn't gain that much at the end of the story. Therefore, this might explain why the film failed to spread through word of mouth. I imagine a lot of audience members not knowing what to think, not knowing how to process what they just watched, and, consequentially, the film itself fading from public consciousness in the new millennium. So why do I think that this is a great film? Well, I'll give you 5 reasons. Number 1, the story. For starters, it's a good story. Beloved brilliantly epitomizes the conflict of the Reconstruction era, in which slavery may have been outlawed, yet black Americans everywhere still were not free. Toni Morrison took the true story of Margaret Garner and put a stunning supernatural twist on it by confronting us with the question of, what if we were literally haunted by the ghosts of our past? What if Sethe's wish to get to know the baby daughter she herself murdered turned out to be more hellish than she imagined? This drama is communicated effectively to the screen, thanks to the sterling adaptation abilities of Adam Brooks and Richard LaGravenese. They succeeded in finding the movie inside the book. And because it's a good story, I also find the film to be a gripping entertainment. Beloved is not a highbrow art film, it's an engaging tale. Dark-mooded though these characters may be, I like spending time with them, and every other scene has me on the edge of my seat, waiting in suspense to see what happens next. Number 2, the music. I'm listening to Rachel Portman's powerful musical score even as I'm writing this narration, because I get a ton of energy and inspiration from it. Like the movie itself, the music is subtly horrific and romantic. It serves as the film's furnace, guiding the audience to understand how every scene works on a tonal level. And that's essential for a film like this one, where tone is everything. Number 3, the performances. I do accept Oprah Winfrey as Sethe. Whenever I watch the film, it takes me a few minutes to process it, but eventually, Winfrey disappears into the role. Winfrey may not be the world's most experienced actress, but she was able to tap into Sethe's pain, her sadness, her incoherence, her arrogance. What Mark Twain once wrote about a freed slave woman living a life absent of both trouble and joy, I think, comes to the surface in Oprah Winfrey's strong performance as Sethe. Kimberly Elise has one of the most difficult roles in the film. Her performance helps me to understand the fear and aggravation which Denver experiences on a constant basis. I'm always very happy for her when she breaks from those chains at the end and regains control of her life.
Paul D? You don't have to stay away. But you watch how you talk to my mama, you hear?
Don't worry.
Hey, Miss Denver! Wait up!
Hi. This is what Toni Morrison said to me, which was something which I've carried around in my head, is that beloved is the bit in you that you cannot betray.
Thandie Newton's performance is a shock. When I read the book, I had no idea how this character was going to come to life on screen, an infant resurrected in an adult young woman's body. What Newton does with the role is marvelous, simultaneously making Beloved adorable, sympathetic, sexy, and finally, dangerous. Whenever Danny Glover is on screen, I cheer up. He plays Paul D as the last glint of light, pushing fervently against an overwhelming darkness. Toni Morrison described Paul D in her book as the man who could make the women cry. Morrison herself proclaimed Glover as providing the film with a wonderfully comforting masculine energy. And hey, I can't top that kind of praise. Number 4, the directing. Nobody but Jonathan Demme could have directed Beloved the way he did. Of course, he fills the picture with his signature shots of characters staring paralyzingly straight into the camera while speaking, but Demme's influence extends beyond that. He gives Ed Saxon a cameo. He's got old collaborator Jason Robards making an appearance at the end. Old collaborator Tak Fujimoto does dazzling cinematography as always. And in general, the film benefits from that rich sense of humanity which is present in Demme's best films. What I mean by that is that nothing in this film feels artificial. When you watch Beloved, you're looking at characters who feel real to us. They resonate. They're alive. I don't feel like I'm on the outside looking in. I feel like I'm trapped in there in that dreadful house on 124 Bluestone Road, forced to share company with characters who aren't as fortunate as I am. Only a great director can pull this sort of thing off when a film is actually intensely transcendent, when it's more than just a movie. And even though the film is primarily set during the Reconstruction era, I have to say that my favorite scenes in Beloved are those apocalyptic Sweet Home flashbacks, which hang over the whole thing. The rule in screenwriting is that you should never do flashbacks, but without these particular flashbacks, a movie like Beloved just wouldn't work. They help you to better visualize what it must have been like to be a tortured slave at the mercy of terrible oppressors. When Sethe escapes, you are enormously relieved, and when that hick white girl helps Sethe give birth on her way to freedom in Ohio, my God, is that an emotional roller coaster or what? I can totally see why Demme regretted that he could not have made that part of the movie even more epic, but what he achieved with it remains remarkable. Then, when the inevitable scene comes of Sethe trying to slaughter all her children, Demme makes it nasty, gory, tragic, just as it should be. We don't see everything that goes on behind that closed door, but little is left to the imagination. You have to show it, and he does. Number 5, the ending. I would argue that the ending works precisely because it is so bittersweet. There is still a small glimmer of hope for Sethe at the end, because Paul D has returned to her at a time when everyone else, including Denver, has long since abandoned her.
Paul? Best thing.
You your best thing, Zeta. You are.
Me.
That right there, I would argue, is the catharsis, the film's emotional release. Paul D making the effort to help Sethe understand that she must learn to love herself again, rather than continuously obsess over her dead daughter. The combination of that, plus the final flashback of Baby Shugs declaring hallelujah to her followers, makes this, at last, an uplifting film in an intelligently subtle sense. Far from being a nihilistic film, Beloved says that slavery can be crushed, even internal slavery, the kind which hurts us for extended periods of time when we have trouble letting go of our demons. It's like the film is saying, if Sethe has a chance of overcoming it, then you can too. Just don't push your loved ones out of your life. Accept help when you need it. Admit your mistakes. Atone for them. Let go of the dead. Embrace life and forgive yourself. When it comes to the films which Jonathan Demme directed after Beloved, I'd say that my favorite was 2008's Rachel Getting Married. It allowed Demme to step back from the Hollywood studio system and return to the basic elements which made him so special as a filmmaker. The characters felt like real people, the casting was spot on, so naturally the performances were excellent, and the drama of the story made you simultaneously smile and cringe, a lot like life itself. Towards the end of his life, Demme began work on a documentary about water protectors working to defend life on Earth at the Standing Rock Indian Reservation. But in April 2017, Demme experienced a rapid decline in health due to complications from esophageal cancer and heart disease, and he passed away at the age of 73. His son, Brooklyn Demme, is now committed to finishing that documentary and picking up where his father left off.
He lived an amazing life, and it was an honor to know him both personally and professionally, and I miss him.
Toni Morrison died in August 2019 at the age of 88. The documentary Toni Morrison, The Pieces I Am, was released in theaters shortly before her death, yet while a sizable chunk of it was devoted to telling the story about how and why she wrote Beloved, only about a couple of minutes of the documentary was devoted to any discussion about the film adaptation. We got to hear Oprah Winfrey state what her quote-unquote hopes for the film were, but that was it.
My hope was that people would feel that story and see the beauty of our African American history, including slavery.
The documentary provided no indication as to what it was like actually making the beloved film, how it was received, whether or not Toni Morrison herself was still as proud of the film as she was in 1998, and so on. So hopefully, after watching this video essay, a lot of this has become clearer to the viewer. I do not want the beloved film to keep languishing in obscurity in this century. Beloved may not have sold a lot of popcorn at the box office, but there is no need for Oprah Winfrey to remember the film as a little more than an expensive mistake. I believe that this film did find some sort of an audience, and that there must be plenty of silent fans out there. I'd appreciate it if some of them found this video, watched it, and spread the word around. And let's finally get a Blu-ray release. Pack it with some informative special features this time. Interview the surviving cast and crew on camera. Give their achievement the respect that it deserves. This powerful film is long overdue for a retrospective. When film critic Glenn Kenny interviewed Jonathan Demme at the time of Beloved's release, Demme declared, "I feel haunted, in the best sense of the word, by the experience of making this film. It wasn't a difficult shoot. It was a joyful shoot. I still miss the shooting so much. And the dailies, every night, it was a celebration. There'd be a certain point where you'd hear Oprah go, 'I ain't never seen no movie like this before.'"
Hallelujah!
Thanks for watching.